This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com as a big World Championship Wrestling fan who has interviewed WCW wrestlers extensively right here on the Hannibal TV. I had to watch the Death of WCW, part one of The Rock's documentary called Where the Big Boys Play. In Canada, it's blocked on YouTube for some reason. But if you search hard enough, you can find it. Let's put it that way. And I just finished watching it. One thing I'll point out right away where Bret Hart's whining right from the start of this, how I agree with him that they wasted him in WCW, but to say nothing good came out of WCW for him, like didn't he have like a $3 million a year contract? And from what I understand, what from what I've understand about the story, after this Goldberg kick that, yes, he's wrestled for decades, but that one Goldberg kick is the concussion that did him in. It wasn't any of the others through the decades and decades he wrestled or the 10 matches he had after those Goldberg kicks. And then he had a Lloyd's of London insurance policy, which is why when I've heard him explain this himself, one of the reasons why he had to wrestle so limitedly after that was because he was getting these Lloyd's of London's payoff. So the first thing right off the bat that stood out to me, does this guy ever stop whining? He whines about his time in WWE, whines about his time in WCW. He's a multi-millionaire that was pushed to the moon in wrestling. I liked the other thing I liked to see was Eric Bischoff's Ninja Star Wars game because as a fan of the whole WCW folklore, we've been hearing about this game for decades, and he actually shows the Ninja Star Wars game in it. Kevin Sullivan, who probably there's a lot of footage of him on this channel talking about WCW. He was the most successful booker in WCW, you could say, definitely, because he was booking during the height of its popularity with Bischoff. And he had good insights in there, but he definitely he plays to people that interview him, I find, with Kevin Sullivan. And I guess I don't blame him in some ways for it, but he gave different versions of still basically the same story, but the way he tells it is different than some of the other times he tells it as far as putting certain people over or throwing jabs at them. But I could understand why he would want to keep this one um, not anti-Hogan like he has been sometimes, because obviously Hulk Hogan is going to watch that. They a lot of the blame of both the popularity of WCW and towards the end of this episode, the beginning of the decline of WCW goes on Hulk Hogan in this. The one thing that I disagreed with, and even Meltzer pointed this out on Wrestling Observer Radio, first of all about Hulk Hogan, he wrestled at King of the Ring '93 in WWF, which is like usually in June, right? Then he's in Bash at the Beach '94 in July. And they keep acting in this like he was off for so long, not wrestling because of all these scandals, blah blah blah. He was off for a year. He was literally off for a year. He was WWF champion in '93, WCW champion in '94, if you want to put it that way. But the other thing is the way they act, like, oh, WCW was in the gutter, nobody watched it, blah 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 blah. Look at WWF in '93 and '94. They were not even running the main arenas in this town. They were going to Hull, Quebec, which is like the rougher side of town here, in the minor hockey arena that holds about 4,000 people, and they'd be lucky if they got it 30% full when they came here in '93 and '94. So I wouldn't say that WCW was leaps and bounds ahead of them. And as Meltzer even stated in Wrestling Observer Radio, WCW Saturday Night did better ratings than WWE cable programming in a lot of years. Raw was not crazy popular in 1994. The you had wasn't that the year where they had Isaac Yankem and all these horrible Jim Cornette gimmicks like TL Hopper and Alex Porto and my old buddy the Goon and Freddie Joe Floyd, all these awful gimmicks is they were not leaps and bounds ahead of WCW. I from about once I discovered WCW around late 90, early 91, although I was a huge WWF fan, I always liked WCW better for some reason until the last few years of WCW. Then I started to like I'm as much as I do give Vince Russo credit for getting the best TNA ratings and helping start the Attitude Era, and I am friends with him. I'm pretty sure even after I say this, I'll be friends with him. He doesn't care. I hated his WCW booking. I absolutely hated it. I still watch the product most of the time, but I hated everything about it at that point in time. And I never liked when they started. I was never a Chris Benoit fan. I don't take away that he's a good wrestler, but when they started to push him, like it's just like why. For instance, when Sid lost the title to Benoit, which that's stupid, which I'm sure they're gonna cover, but like to me, I'm thinking as a kid, like Sid is awesome. Like he's this huge, massive monster of a guy, great character, and this Chris Benoit, who's, for me, I like the big personalities and the larger than life characters. Benoit to me, well, I never didn't like him as a wrestler. I never thought he should have been like a top guy leading the company. So that I started to lose interest there too. They do talk to Ted Turner's son in this. And it's interesting. They really like. Obviously, The Rock is on the board of directors in WWE. The good thing about this documentary, even though it has a lot of stories that we've probably all heard before, they're using the WWE archive footage of WCW and WWE that WWE owns, and I guess The Rock has access to with his collaboration with Vice making this. So there's visuals to all the stories. Kevin Nash is in it, talking about the thing with the outsiders. That was awesome. And one point, I forget who said it. I think it was Conan. Conan, who I've interviewed. I would suggest people look that one up if you want to know more about his time in WCW, the Hannibal TV Conan. He mentioned that nobody wears any WCW shirts other than the NWO shirts today, which I'm sure is pretty much true. But that just reminds me for the people that say wrestling is hot today, and I know I've said this before, but in the 90s, when I was like in grade 10 and 11 and somewhat 12 in high school, it started to lose it around 12 a little bit. You would see NWO and Austin 316 shirts everywhere. People can say Cody Rhodes is hot. If I go to the mall tomorrow and walk around the mall, I'm not going to see one Cody Rhodes store. Remember video stores? You'd go into the video store and you'd see people with NWO shirts on. And like, and I've told this story throughout my life. I started as a wrestling fan when it was popular around 89. Then when it got unpopular around 92, at least in North America, 92, 93, 94, I was actually bullied for wearing wrestling shirts and stuff to school. And I actually had to defend myself and stand up for myself. Sometimes I stood by wrestling. And then the big thing I remember, and I'll never forget this, for the first time in years, I was in grade 9 and I'm looking and like one of the cool grade one of the popular like grade 12s is wearing an NWO shirt. And I'm like, what the fuck? I would like I thought people made fun of wrestling. So to me, not knowing like about the up and down periods then I couldn't understand why people were starting to wear the shirts again. But of course I was very happy about it. and it made me popular because I, of course, knew all about wrestling. But that it was just a magical time back then. WCW, I really liked the product overall. They dropped the ball in a lot of areas. But it's funny, they're complaining in this about some years before Eric Bischoff losing 10 million. AEW lost 34 million last year, according to reports. Um, but yeah, house show business was not as good before the NWO took off as WWE. WCW did not promote their house shows well, and pay-per-view buys were not as much as WWE. There wasn't streaming deals like there is today, where you could make all this extra money off of the footage. And for all the people, even in this, that are saying, "Oh, the network executives would have taken it off, whether it was making money or not," I highly, highly doubt. Although some people may not have liked wrestling at the height of the NWO, when WCW was turning a huge profit, and back before A&E did documentaries, you had A&E doing documentaries on it. You had exposés on all the news channels. The video stores again were full of wrestling videos. I mean, I highly doubt Turner people were saying we got to get rid of this wrestling. It's just making too much money and it's so popular. I mean, I hate tennis. I mean, there's beautiful women that play, but if I was on a network or I promoted tennis or I had to promote it and it was making money, I would definitely take the money. I wouldn't be like, we got to get this off of my network. That just doesn't make sense. But I will say, I don't know about The Rock, but as far as Dark Side of the Ring goes, they use very weird and fancy editing. I know this by how they edited me in the Abdullah Butcher Dark Side of the Ring. They did like 6 hours of interviews, and they really played with some of the comments I made. Eric Bischoff says at one point he'd never heard of WCW when he went to work for WCW. I have I have to imagine he either said that wrong or it was taken out of context. Because how could you be in the AWA and not have heard of WCW, this company that was owned by Ted Turner, where wrestlers were starting to get guaranteed contracts, which was very rare in those days. But overall, I enjoyed it. I will watch the next one. I enjoyed it. Seeing The Rock in it. I don't hide that I'm a fan of The Rock, and I think it's good that The Rock does projects like this, because this is more interesting than like Dynamite Tonight. Whatever the hell happened on Dynamite Tonight, I skimmed through the results. Nothing interesting. It's good to get keep people interested in wrestling. So when The Rock like does return, people will not think wrestling is so uncool because they'll watch these documentaries. Because like let's face it, to the people that actually were WCW fans and Attitude Era fans, I'm sure there's some, maybe 20 to 30% at the most, that still watch the product. But I I work out all the time. I talk to a lot of people. I'm known around this community. When people haven't, other than me wrestling, which of course they're going to ask me about wrestling, the first time they had brought wrestling up, your average people come up to me and talk about the current product in wrestling, was when The Rock started to wrestle for WWE again. They they haven't said anything to me in years, so it's like it's not like in the Attitude Era or the NWO era where you'd go to the gym and people knew about the pay-per-views. Nobody's talking about this upcoming WWE pay-per-view. The rematch of Cody Rhodes against AJ Styles again, where he's just gonna beat him again because he's facing The Rock in next year's WrestleMania. I'm just saying, like, they talk about Hogan and Sting in this and how the ball was dropped with the finish on that. They didn't interview Sting, but Bischoff talks about it, Bret Hart talks about it. Uh, I remember when that match happened, everybody was talking about it. They did drop the ball on that match, and no one will probably ever know the real truth, but they certainly screwed that one up. The finish was horrendous. It didn't make any sense. I'll just skim through some of your comments to see what you guys think about it. I'm not a golf fan. I'm really not. A lot of people actually, a couple times have actually pretty good looking girls have asked me to play golf, and I don't like golf so much that I've even turned down dates with some pretty attractive women who think because I play sports, I'd like golf. No, Christopher, they 100% would not have pulled the plug. It had been losing money for years when they pulled the plug. It was still making money. They would have kept it around. And Dave Meltzer agrees with me on that. If you watch my interview with him, he talks about it. Someone says it's okay, it's overdone. I agree that it's overdone, the topic, but for new people or people that aren't necessarily wrestling fans that don't know about all the behind the scenes stuff that people like me are still interested in, maybe they'll watch that and research more and then watch more shoot interviews like I do or whatever, because no matter how cool or uncool the product is, the behind the scenes drama in wrestling is actually more entertaining than the product more often than not. The products Thank you for this guy that said Benoit had no personality. When they started acting like he would, and I'm sorry, I'll piss. Like you guys could. I also hate for the millionth time. I'll say it. Will Ospreay is one of the fakest looking wrestlers I've ever seen. All these leg slaps in a match. I've done kickboxing. I've trained with Alain Moussi from the Kickboxer reboot movies. I'm friends with them. I'm friends with Jean-Yves Theriault. Look him up if you don't know who he is. I'm not saying I'm the greatest kickboxer, but I know the greatest, and they don't slap their legs when they kick. I'm sorry if you think that you have to. Do you think your a leg slap happens in real fights? You've never been in a real fight. To me, when I see leg slaps and these ridiculous looking flips and cooperative moves, I just want to puke. Where they talked about um, Kevin Nash taking Rey Mysterio on this behind the scenes at Nitro and driving his head into the trailer. To me, that was realistic. That looked crazy. That's more impressive to me than a Canadian destroyer. Kevin Nash is 7 foot, taking Rey Mysterio and throwing him like a dart into the trailer. Someone says WCW outside Scott Steiner was almost unwatchable from 99 to 2001. I like Tank Abbott overall, even though they used him badly. By the way, shout out to Tank Abbott. He's going to be on Joe Rogan. Tank Abbott is a really nice guy. Check out my millions of interviews with him on this channel. Will says he's always liked WCW. The other thing that I know WWE owns the name of WCW, but maybe some executive will see this and be like, well, you know what? Maybe there could be something made profitable with wrestling if it was actually run properly, which obviously WWE, they have a system that works great. They're making a fortune now. I think I know there's might be a few other companies that are profitable. AEW is not one of them. Impact is not one of them. CMLL would be one of them. Someone says today's generation of wrestlers would be devoured in the WCW. Yes, they would. They 100% would. Imagine Sami Zayn in WCW. Imagine it. You can say they had luchadors, but Rey Mysterio was jacked, and he was a hell of a lot more talented than Sami Zayn. Could you imagine Kevin Owens doing this fight gimmick where he supposedly KOs? He's never been in a real fight in his life. He's backed down from both CM Punk and Jeremy Prophet. Imagine Kevin Owens against Tank Abbott trying to act like he's a tough guy. It would just be funny. It would be just like when Goldberg or Lesnar squashed him. Jericho was great in WCW, Burley. I've said this a million times. Chris is Jericho. was one of the best things in WCW because he was fighting like you knew he had to fight for. I think he was better when he had to like fight to like get noticed. When he has everything handed to him, I'm not saying he's one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. I just personally didn't find him as entertaining when he did get in those positions where he could do whatever he wanted. I liked when he was fighting from the bottom. Um, and I kind of always get sad when I think of Chris Jericho and WCW because I used to walk to school with this guy that was a big Chris Jericho fan, and we would always like talk about Chris Jericho a lot and what was going on in WCW because he was like the biggest Chris Jericho fan ever, and he actually was in a car accident this summer after we graduated. It was so it kind of makes me sad to think about it. He was only like 17 or 18 when he died. But I just remember the conversations we would have about Chris Jericho. Yeah, less leg slaps. I mean, at some point when Chris Adams did it, nobody knew. There wasn't the internet. Now everybody does it and it's overdone and it makes me sick. I mean, the good thing about the cruiserweights in WCW is we were just being exposed to that, so it was brand new and it wasn't the whole card of it. I know it's not the whole card now, but it's way more small guys that look like I could go like this and be and you can say it's not real, whatever. I like to at least be able to suspend my disbelief. I'd rather watch like Lance Archer, Brian Cage, or even John Moxley. I mean, John Moxley's big enough to be believable. Uh, but yeah, there's way too many small people in wrestling these days. How about Hogan's flap extensions? I still think it was great for them to bring Hogan in overall, and turning him heel did rejuvenate his career. The creative control thing, they did what they had to do to keep him. They could have done a bet. The other thing that I'll mention about this, and I know I've gone on for like 22 minutes now, but you guys have given me memories. The way that like when they talk about Mike Tyson going in WWE at WrestleMania 13 and how Kevin Sullivan told Kevin Nash the ship has sailed or something along those lines. The iceberg's coming in or something. They're already talking like they're dead. They didn't band together and like fight or come up with better ideas. Just like with Thunder, there's Kevin Sullivan talking about it right on this show, and I've talked to enough wrestlers. I know what the attitude was. They were like, Thunder, we don't want to do Thunder. We're just not going to put any effort into Thunder. And what could have, I understand that they didn't want Thunder. It's funny that I'm not even going to mention Tony Khan again, but he's saying he wants more programming above the 5 hours he already has. Thunder, at least WCW knew it, watered down their product, but they didn't put enough effort into it. They really could have delegated stuff better and use the mind, like have someone else do what WWE does now, have like separate writing team for Thunder and Nitro. I know I wasn't there at the time, but it does seem like, for instance, Sullivan saying the ship has sailed or whatever, the icebergs hit after the Tyson thing, I'd be like, holy shit, they just did that. We better come up with something better. What are we going to do to beat this? We got all of Ted Turner's money at our disposal. Um, let's use Holyfield. He beat Tyson, or come up with somebody other than who they eventually brought, Jay Leto, which did get the publicity. But give me a break. Carl Malone was good. Carl Malone was great. Not as widely known as Mike Tyson, but there was other people around. There was stuff they could have done. I don't think they're high. There was also a lot of partying in WCW that they'll probably get into. They were it seems like almost in a way they were celebrating too much the success, and then when they started to get beat, it's like, okay, well now we're just going to party because it's almost over. or we're just gonna enjoy the rest of our paycheck and get drunk. There was drinking at shows and stuff too back then, not for the undercard talent, but, like, I just don't think that they held it together well enough, but they had a good run. They should have brought Jerry. Their hands were tied in some ways where they talked about in this. WWE had more creative freedom than Ted Turner, but there is celebrities they could have used. There's stuff that they could have done. There's great minds in professional wrestling, and they all didn't just work for WWE. Sullivan may have been burnt out by that point. Send him on vacation, bring somebody else in. I guess by the time they finally did that with Vince Russo, it was just the wrong guy for the job. And then they ended up bringing Sullivan back in, and they didn't give anyone enough time really. Once they started switching Russo around, after Sullivan, it's then Russo and Bischoff as a team. I don't even know who it was at the end. I think it was still Russo and Bischoff, but Russo may have gone home. It was so hard to follow, but the management wasn't good. I hated David Arquette becoming champion. I absolutely hated it. I hated it at the time. I did like the movie Ready to Rumble, and I will call David Arquette a pussy for not wanting to wrestle me. David Panzer tried to get it to happen. He wouldn't do it. So I'll say it publicly again. You should still wrestle me, David Arquette. It would be, you should, it would be a big thing around here, and it would definitely get YouTube hits. But he's older now. But when he was doing his little comeback of matches, I did try through a few different people that knew him, where he was trying to say, "Oh, I'm gonna earn credibility as a wrestler," and then he let that guy cut him up in I forget his name. Some hardcore guy sliced him up with glass and all this. He didn't gain any more respect. He just brought more attention to what a stupid idea it was to have made him champion, in my opinion, when he came back and said, "Oh, I'm gonna get the wrestling fans respect by letting this garbage wrestler cut me with glass." Someone says the slap nuts. That was another thing that turned me off when they gave Jeff Jarrett the Honky Tonk Man's gimmick, which was the Honky Tonk Man's smashing the guitar. At least the Honky Tonk Man pretended to play. I don't remember Jeff Jarrett even pretending to play. I don't know. I like Tennessee. I really like Tennessee, and I love Jerry Jarrett. It was very sad when he died. We were friends. We may have only known each other a short time, but I called him up numerous times and we talked. He gave me advice on several things, and I have the longest interview Jerry Jarrett ever did at 4.5 hours. So this is just my neutral opinion. The slap nuts gimmick was horrible. The stealing Honky Tonk Man's guitar thing, and Jeff Jarrett was like a mid card guy, and we're trying to like, how is he champion over all the great wrestlers they had in there? I hated the Jeff Jarrett era. I hated that. As I said, I like Vince Russo. And then Jeff Jarrett ended up being a Benedict Arnold on Vince Russo, the guy that literally gave him the biggest push of his career, and then treated him like crap in later years. I don't know if they've made up since then or not, but Russo gave Jarrett a push that was crazy. Someone said Chris Jericho was better in WCW. I liked Jeff Jarrett better when he was Double J. I don't hate him though. I don't hate him at all. I do think he's being underused. He's in AEW. They're not even using him. I mean, I think he's still in great shape for his age. I just don't think he could be. He deserves more exposure than he gets in AEW because he could help get younger guys over. They do nothing with him. I think they did give Bobby Roode a push for a bit, but he broke his neck or something. But he's working as an agent now. Stefan Amell, I don't even know who that is. Someone said Yeah. Yeah, Jeff Jarrett somehow had all the stroke in WCW, which I never got. Not he was good in TNA. He was better in TNA than WCW, but TNA was when he was on top, it made sense because like this was not the giant WCW company that went to the Georgia Dome. This was TNA Universal Studios and the Nashville Fairgrounds. TNA was never viewed as like a stadium company or even hockey arena size company. They were in the sound stage at Universal. In that small environment, yes, Jeff Jarrett didn't look out of place as a star, but when you got freaking Goldberg on your roster, why is Jeff Jarrett the champion? And the people that keep telling me that Goldberg, it was time for him to lose, it was not time. They could have gone further with Goldberg. Way, way, way further with Goldberg. I mean, even John Paul, we don't always agree on wrestling stuff. He agrees with me. They cut Goldberg too soon, and he lost all of his momentum. Then they turned him heel, which I'm sure they're going to get into. But they really blew it with Goldberg. Goldberg was the golden goose. They killed the golden goose for no reason. And I love Kevin Nash. I don't even know what the behind the scenes thing was. And if anyone was going to do it, as they said in this, Kevin Nash was a good choice to do it, but it didn't make any sense at that time. Who had the walk first, Jeff Jarrett or Ric Flair? Well, Buddy Rogers, the Nature Boy, 100%. The original Nature Boy, and Jeff Jarrett is like 20 years younger than Rick. I don't know about 20 years, but maybe 15 years younger than Flair. So definitely Ric Flair. As I said, I don't mind Jeff Jarrett. I just hated him as WCW champion. He was fine in TNA. I used him once when he was in TNA in Great North Wrestling. Um, but I just don't think a company that runs events at the Georgia Dome and has Randy Savage on the roster and Hulk Hogan and Goldberg and Lex Luger and Ric Flair. I just I don't put Jeff Jarrett in the same category as those guys. Then Hogan job to Kidman. Hogan picks his jobs though very weird. He's very smart about his jobs. I'll just we can finish on this. The Jacques Rougeau job that he did in WCW, which was on a house show, it ultimately the fans were mad when he beat Rougeau. I was there. They were furious. Hogan hadn't wrestled in Montreal for years, and the NWO was so hot in '96. They booed Jacques Rougeau against Hulk Hogan, and they were furious. But in the end, ultimately, now Hulk Hogan, because he put Jacques Rougeau over, it's like he put one of Quebec's own over out of respect for Quebec. So it's like he's over forever in Quebec for doing that. So that loss didn't hurt him. They never acknowledged it on TV or anything, but the people of Quebec all know about it. It's like a legend in Quebec. The Kidman was, first of all, nobody was watching at that time. Very few people even remember it. But he always uses that, hey, I dropped to Kidman, I'll put anybody over. But he knew nobody's even watching at that time. And yeah, they wasted it. They did nothing with that angle. But you'll always hear him say, "Oh, I'll put anyone over. Look, I'll put Kidman over." Like, it's very funny that he uses it that way. But you know what? He'll make a bigger deal about the other thing about Kidman is Kidman was never going to be in competition with Hulk Hogan. Kidman was never going to take Hulk Hogan's spot. He has a bigger issue with Sting, who's like right at the same spot as Hulk Hogan. They're back and forth a bit at that time. You don't necessarily want a job to a guy when you're both like the top guys in the company. That's when it becomes a bigger deal. If it's you letting Kidman, who's no competition, probably one of the lower paid guys in WCW, like it's no big deal. Someone says Jackie Fargo did the walk versus the Fargo strut. I don't know if he was before or after Buddy Rogers, but I'm a big Buddy Rogers fan. Mrs. Hogan had to be out of the country to job. Yeah, remember when Bret Hart wouldn't job, but that seems to be now more likely a work than a fate than a shoot. I liked Billy Kidman too, and I've met him. I think he still works for WWE. I've met Kidman a bunch of times, but he was where I think he got punished in WWE. He did like a shooting star. I forget who it was on, but he needs some guy in the face and screwed him up badly. And once you do that in a major company, like they're never gonna give you the same push because the top guys aren't gonna want to work with you. But I like Kidman too, and I think he's still an agent, and you got to give him respect. For a while, he was married to Tori Wilson, and I hear that's not the only diva he's been with. He's quite a ladies' man. Mil Mascara is against the Blood Hunter fantasy match. That would be interesting. Well, I wouldn't put anything past Mil Mascaras. He's old, but he's still in shape. Anyways, let me know if you're not watching this live, what you thought about the show in the comments. I'll give it a thumbs up. Mrs. Kidman had the most talent of all the flock members. I would say Raven did. I would say Raven was also best. I liked Raven better in WCW than ECW, and I certainly didn't like Raven as Raven in WWE. I did like the Johnny Polo character. I was a kid for whatever reason. I loved Johnny Polo. I still remember I went to a house show and Johnny Polo in an unadvertised match wrestled Owen Hart. He was only supposed to be there to manage the Quebecers. And I was going nuts because for some reason I was the biggest Johnny Polo. I'm weird that way. I like Triple H better in WCW. Why? I don't know. I like Steve Austin better in WCW. The Flock, they had Van Ham. They looked good. They looked good sitting there, but they were jobbing most of the time. Yeah, Kidman was the best other than Raven. I'll agree with the guy on that. Van Hammer, I would like to get an interview with him. That guy made a hell of a lot of money in WCW and was a terrible wrestler. Somebody says touche. Raven, supposedly great mind for the business. Supposedly came up with a lot of stuff in ECW, but I haven't really heard of much else since then. Maybe he just doesn't care anymore. Anyways, I've interviewed Raven on this channel. Um, last or wait, I think it was 2021. I was supposed to wrestle in Philadelphia with Raven managing me or something on a show Rob Feinstein was doing at the ECW arena against Nunzio. But it didn't end up working out due to travel issues. Have a great night.